Welcome everyone to our monthly live stream. It's good to be back with everyone. Happy New Year. We have some great guests that we're going to be excited to introduce here in just a few minutes, but it's great to be back. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome. If you're joining us again, please let us know in the comments where you're joining us from. It's always great to see folks from all over the country and even all over the world, from Michigan, from Florida, New York City, all over the place. So let us know where it is that you guys are joining us from. First, let me welcome back Nick Rich. Nick, tell everybody hello and Happy New Year.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. It's great for everybody. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Awesome. Welcome back. And then probably a familiar face to some of our previous live streams, Jonathan Durda from MoFi. Jonathan, welcome back. Great to have you.
Good to see you guys. Yeah, glad to be
here.
A
couple quick intros. If you don't mind, just let everybody know a little bit about where you're joining us from and what it is that you do at MoFi.
Well, I'm joining you from frozen over Wisconsin right now. I'm about an hour south of Milwaukee, and it's cold out right now. So, but yeah, I run MoFi distribution, sales, and marketing. Work with guys like Andrew Jones for MoFi Electronics, and I'm excited to talk about the Sourcepoint speakers with him today.
Awesome. Well, welcome. And I think, Nick, you had a fun question. We'll go back to you real quick for our little intro question that we usually kick things off with.
Yeah. So my question for everybody is going to be, what was the first hi-fi speaker, first speaker that really sent you on your hi-fi journey? So this is the first one that you remember. And for me, I worked at a record store in college, and my dad always had speakers growing up, but they all just look like traditional speakers. And an Ohm Walsh speaker was one of the first that came in that just really, I was like, oh, this is such a cool looking speaker. Probably doesn't hold up to some of the toys I get to play with now, but at the time I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. So that's probably the one that kind of set me on my way.
Yeah, very cool. John, what about you?
Well, I grew up in a hi-fi shop. My dad owned a store in South Bend, Indiana, and in my bedroom, we were living in a little duplex, and my bedroom system was a pair of B&W 801s. This was pre-Matrix series with Carver Silver 7 tube amplifiers. And I remember very clearly it being, 6, 7 years old when he put on Beach Boys record, I think it was Pet Sounds, just being blown away that something could sound like that in my bedroom. So I've been hooked ever since.
Yeah, I can see why for sure. And joining us for the first time, Andrew Jones, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you.
Great to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome. Let everybody know where it is. I guess that you, for those who don't know, where you are joining us from.
I'm joining you from my lab listening room office in Beverly Hills, California.
It's
about 65 degrees right now.
There you go.
Get out of
nice
here.
and sunny outside. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, and you'd think it'd be a little bit warmer, but it's actually below freezing. It's like right around 30 degrees, which is a little unseasonable for this time of year, but it happens. So great to have you, Andrew. For those who maybe aren't familiar or they're joining us, new to MoFi and maybe haven't heard of Andrew Jones, maybe give us a little bit of a quick background. One, maybe the first, like Nick said, maybe the first speaker that really caught your attention, given that's sort of your wheelhouse. And then what it is that you do now at MoFi, and sort of maybe a little bit about the journey and how you got there.
Well, I will say it was nothing that I tried to build when I was a teenager, because I never finished a single project I ever started, which is, don't know why I'm in product development now rather than research. But it was...
Someone commented on your Beverly Hills accent, by the way.
I ended up with, the first revelatory listening experience was a friend of mine that I met at university, and he'd got quad ESL 57s driven by quad 33303 and a Decca London cartridge and a unipivot pickup arm. And I'd never experienced, although I'd been passionate about hi-fi for since pre-teens, I never had the opportunity to listen to anything, and certainly not that good. We didn't have a hi-fi store in the town where I grew up. So that was an amazing experience, and never forgotten it. And as soon as I could, I bought my own pair of ESL 57s, which I still have, back in England. But I bought an extra set over here to make up for that.
There you go. Very cool. Before we dive in a little bit deeper, Jonathan, maybe why don't you share with everyone a little bit about what we are giving away here today?
Yeah, to celebrate the new year, we're giving away a pair of MoFi Sourcepoint 8 loudspeakers designed by Andrew. So this is the follow-up and baby brother to the Sourcepoint 10s that we debuted last April. So a lot of the technology, pretty much all the technology that are in the Sourcepoint 10s, just taken down into a much smaller, more domesticated form factor. These retail for $2,750 a pair in the US. So we're gonna have a lucky winner today.
That's right. That's right. Super excited. Thank you guys for providing this today. And then best question giveaway as well.
Yeah, we just finished packaging the Joni Mitchell Blue Ultra Disc One Step. So this is our flagship record series. These retail for $125. So whoever has the best question today will get a promotional copy of that.
Very, very cool. Thanks again for providing that. So if you have a question, go ahead and drop them in the comments. We'll get to as many questions as we can here in just a few minutes. And again, thanks guys for providing that. John, real quick, we'll start with you. Maybe for those who aren't as familiar with MoFi and don't know about MoFi, maybe you can share a little bit about the brand and then maybe some of the other brands that you guys work so closely with as well.
Sure. So almost 10 years ago, we got a team of industry people together to start MoFi Distribution and MoFi Electronics. So I help manage the distribution side where we represent brands like Quad, which Andrew just mentioned, among many others, Hi-Fi Rose, which Audio Advice is a great Hi-Fi Rose dealer, one of the first to bring that on. Solid Steel equipment racks from Italy. We have about 18 brands, so we're not going to talk about all of them today. But while we were building the distribution company, we decided we wanted to build turntables under the MoFi banner. So MoFi for decades, since 1977, has been known as a leader in audiophile grade pressings of CDs, super audio CDs, and of course vinyl LPs. And so we opened our own factory in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where we fully developed and manufacture these turntables. But that was really just the start of the idea. The whole concept was we wanted to create a complete MoFi experience from source all the way through to loudspeakers. It's taken us a while to get to where we are now. Of course, trying to start a new manufacturing facility and develop products from the ground up takes longer than anyone could possibly imagine. But Andrew really helped take us that next level with the loudspeaker development. So we have turntables, we have electronics in terms of phono preamps. We introduced the Master Phono at Audio Advice Live last August. And now, of course, the Sourcepoint loudspeakers, and much more to come through the rest of this year.
Yeah, very, very cool. And your team was kind enough to, when we were at CES last week, you guys welcomed us to some of your facilities out there and, gave us a little bit of a tour, some things that you guys are working on. So it was great to see, meet the rest of your team and see some things behind the scenes, which was great. So thanks again for having us out there.
Yeah, that's one of the really cool things that I like about what you guys did with the turntable. Because initially, whenever I was in our showroom, whenever you guys brought over the turntable for the first time, and a lot of the guys that were there were like, MoFi is known for their pressings. What do they know about turntables? And you guys are constantly, when you come out with a product, you get really good guys in your team that know exactly what they're doing. And so, by the time that you left with the demo, everybody in the store was like, "This table's awesome for the money." and so and same thing with the Sourcepoints.
Yeah, our kind of sales and marketing team, we're not engineers, but we are enthusiasts. We're customers. We buy what we sell. And what we try to do is we start from a blank page and say, hey, what would we want? I mean, this is really kind of a work of passion, and we put out our wish list, and then it takes guys like Peter Madnick, who developed the new Master Phono, which I have just behind me over here is the new flagship phono preamp. Guys like Peter, Andrew, Alan Perkins, who designs our turntables, people that have years of experience under their belt to actually make those products into reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Really cool. Well, Andrew, transition into what it is, the main topic here. We're talking about the new Sourcepoints. Why don't you maybe share a little bit about what kind of your inspiration, maybe from the past and then now in the present, some of the things that maybe influenced your speaker design journey, and then specifically with the Sourcepoints.
Yeah. It's obvious to everyone it's a concentric driver, and I've had a long history with working with concentric drivers, starting at KEF. Interesting, yesterday, January 17th, was the 30th anniversary of me walking into the office at KEF and saying, okay, I'm quitting. I'm taking a job in Northridge, California. And that was in the morning our time. At lunchtime, everyone comes ringing. Turn on the news. Did you hear the news? There's been an earthquake in Northridge, California. And
wow.
that's what I
Yeah.
just literally resigned 2 hours before that hit. But I didn't move out till June, July time. So you know, most of the damage was repaired by then. But it is quite an anniversary.
Yeah, for sure. Certainly.
Kef was my first real job in hi-fi. I'd always been interested in hi-fi from pre-teens, and so all through school, maths, physics, chemistry, anything that I could use to help me understand about hi-fi, but in particular speakers. I still don't know why I gravitated, although I was building electronics and doing all sorts of things at that age, I gravitated towards an interest in speakers. My twin brother, identical twin brother, he kept with the electronics. So we decided that's what we want to do. Went off to university. He went to one, I went to a different one. I studied physics, joined him after 3 years for postgrad research in, I was doing computer-aided crossover network design. So I did that for about 3 years and then moved sort of sideways to develop speakers that were being used in a research group for doing active noise cancellation. And my brother joined me ultimately in there. He continued for the next 30 odd years designing noise cancelling headsets. Tons of patents on the techniques. But after about 3 years of doing that noise cancellation, it was, I was developing the speakers to help with the process, but it wasn't working on hi-fi speakers. And I happened to bump into Laurie Fincham at one of the hi-fi shows, and he was the technical director of Kef. And Kef for me was the god of speaker companies at that time for doing all the research that they carried out. And I must have casually mentioned that I was looking to move into real hi-fi because a few days later I got a call from Laurie saying, "Oh, Andrew, I realise in all the time we've sort of known each other, you never had a chance to visit the factory. Would you like to come and have a tour?" Oh, cool! So put the phone down, thought, why now? And I realized I must have said that I was interested in moving on. So it was a job interview and I got the job. And so that was the start of really getting to understand what speakers are and how to develop them. So I went into the research department for the first half of my time I was there. And ultimately working under, we hired Dick Small, Dr. Richard H. Small. So if anyone technical out there knows the Teal Small parameters, Small was that person, and he became our head of research, and I was working directly under him. We just had exposure to all the most famous and tutored people in the industry when I worked at Kef. And that lasted 11 years, and then Floyd Toole invited me over here. And I'll say that's 30 years, well, quitting 30 years as of yesterday. I moved out here and joined Infinity. But it was at Kef when we were developing the UniQ driver that I got really interested in concentric drivers. I'd read a paper by Daniel Queen about the next frontier in speaker design is controlling directivity, because separated drivers have very poor directivity control off axis unless you work really hard. And a concentric driver gives you that. And so as we started to develop concentric, I thought, oh, yeah, this is exactly what we need to be doing. And so although I haven't worked exclusively with concentric drivers, there are times when it's maybe not quite the best solution. But most of the time, if I can work with a concentric driver, it's going to be a concentric driver. And when I joined MoFi, as we started to cast around ideas of what the first product should be, it got me excited about concentric drivers even more so than I have been in recent years, because I got the chance to do something different and something that I said I wasn't going to do. So, so that's after Infinity, I joined Pioneer, heading up the development team, and that led into me starting up TAD Home Audio. So technical audio devices existed as a pro audio company since the late 70s, but mostly exclusively for professional applications. although there were versions of it under the exclusive brand that were in the Japanese market or Asian market that were used in homes, but hugely expensive. And I felt we could develop something for the initially the US market that would be high-end audio under the TAD brand. So I got put in charge of that development. So we started TAD home audio in about 2003 was the first product. And that was a fantastic time, getting the chance to work in the highest end with the materials that still haven't really been surpassed. That was another learning experience. The technologies that I had access to play with when working with the Pioneer Corporation. You want to take an electron microscope picture of that cross section of the material? Yeah, just go and do it. Right. I love MoFi, but we don't have an electron microscope.
What is it on the journey? What I guess ultimately what led you to join the MoFi team? What was it that interested you about that?
John Durder. I mean, seriously, part of it was
I can't blame
everyone who works for MoFi. I knew MoFi. After Pioneer and TAD, I helped set up the ELAC Americas operation, and we were doing affordable speakers, the debut speakers that we launched with. I'd gone from the extremes of doing very high end down to very entry, although it's not the first entry speaker I did. And it was Music Direct that was the first group to sign on to sell the debut speakers. Josh Bizarre, he kind of came in and listened, blown away by it. He says, we have to have these. And so they signed on. And so built that relationship through the years. And it was always just such nice people to hang around with and have mutual insults, which carry on to this day.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So Andrew, whenever you were working with MoFi originally, how much of this was MoFi's vision of, hey, this is what the speaker should be, versus giving you complete free reign and say, hey, this is what I want to create?
This is always interesting. So especially when I joined Pioneer with the first speaker, I was given a blank sheet of paper, do something. And it's kind of exciting and a dreadful moment at the same time, because, well, with all the ideas I've got floating around, do what? And same thing happened with ELAC and whatever. So with MoFi, there was just a very limited kind of direction. You mentioned about the JBL 100 that got reissued obviously recently, and this fashion for going back to mid-century and the speakers we all grew up with.
Rock and roll.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was suggested. I think there's a niche market for this. We're just starting. We want to think of niche things to do rather than just do another range of speakers and then follow that with the Mark II versions and the reference versions and keep going on like that. It's kind of study what the market is, study where there's opportunity, and come up with neat solutions. I get excited about designing speakers, as it doesn't matter what the target is, it's how you achieve that target and what technologies and ideas you can come up with to do that, whether it's $100 speaker or $100,000 speaker. So, okay, that sounds fun, the big rock and roll speakers, big bass drivers of the past. And they'd said, we like big, powerful bass. And so that set me off thinking, okay, and obviously with the box design, big and fat and square kind of from those days. Because I'd been, the world's been pigeonholed into doing narrower and narrower and smaller speakers. And there's limitations with doing that, one of which is sensitivity. You can't get everything that you want from a small box. So going to a big box, wow, that's interesting. And big box means a big driver. So I can do at least a 10-inch driver. And I haven't done that since I launched TAD, big 10-inch bass drivers. And they were way more expensive than what I was doing for MoFi. But okay, that's interesting. So that got me started. And then I'm thinking, so what do I do with that big 10-inch bass driver? Since I always like concentric drivers, and I've always said I like to do, I want to do a 3-way system based around a concentric driver because I don't want the cone moving too much. The more it moves, at some point you start hearing some intermodulation products from it moving. Well, that would, if it's now a 3-way design with a 10-inch bass driver in a big box, maybe that's taking it outside of the price point that we were initially thinking of doing. I say initially because I'm sure I exceeded the initial targets because I wanted to incorporate too many cool ideas into it. But okay, 3-way. Well, that complicates things. But if it's a big bass driver, it doesn't have to move very far in order to produce good bass, compared to the 5-inch drivers and 6-inch drivers I was using previously in the ELAC designs. So that was it. I suddenly thought, could I do a 10-inch concentric driver? And the basic premise of a driver like that is not new, because of course there's Tannoy as doing the dual concentric. But they use a different technology for the tweeters. They use compression drivers. And compression drivers we think of generally in terms for pro sound or live sound, because you need extreme efficiency and sound pressure output. I didn't want to go that route for 2 reasons. It would be seen to be too close to copying what Tannoy were doing. And the second reason was I don't know how to design compression drivers. I could read up about it, but I've never done one. So the last thing I really wanted to do is join MoFi with this expectation. Okay, come on, get us a speaker out. Thinking my past history as a kid of never finishing anything, that's not how I want to start at MoFi. So I chose to do a regular direct radiator tweeter. And once I got that in my mind, okay, this sheet of paper is now filled. I know what I want to do. I've not done it before, but it should be doable based on every other concentric driver I've done. But I got to prove it. I got to do experiments. So that led initially to the research phase of the project. I didn't leap into development because that would have meant development means you know what you're doing. I got this expression, it would be development. If I don't know what I'm doing, it's research. And so, in between setting up all my lab and my listening room in this facility, I was kind of working on concepts so I could realize this 10-inch driver. And so it was a very exciting time. But credit to MoFi, they gave me the time to develop the techniques. They spent the money because none of the parts that I would need for the driver I was imagining were available off the shelf. So everything had to be tooled except for the basket, the frame of the woofer. So that means you got to spend money to tool things, to make prototypes, to know if it's even going to work. And if that didn't work, you got to retool and go around the loop again. But we committed to doing it, and that Sourcepoint 10 driver is the result of it. And when I first got that prototype driver and started measuring it, this is actually performing pretty close to what I was hoping I could get out of it. And so just a few tweaks, and built a listening sample. And it's when I first started listening to it, I thought, this is different. This is different from what I've done before. This is interesting. And so then that led into being able to go into doing the full development and productionize it. So
I see a couple of questions here, if you guys don't mind.
No, jump in.
On materials. I think there was one gentleman who was asking Gary, why paper pulp cones rather than other materials? I know that's a question you get a lot, and you just mentioned TAD, where you're dealing with electron microscopes and beryllium that's grown in a lab. But here we are using a very traditional material.
When I joined Infinity, the very first speaker I did, the Prelude, had a mixture of polypropylene and paper cone drivers. And the traditional people at Infinity were throwing a fit over this, that we're Infinity. We're always known for coming out with the latest technologies and cone materials and blah, blah, blah. You can't use paper. I'm going, yes, I can. Paper still has application in the right manner. If you've got an application that needs certain parameters, paper can meet that extremely well. So with this, I look back and think, yeah, we were doing a kind of 70s speaker. And so the materials I've used for the driver, paper and silk cloth, sound like old tech. But it's how you use them, how you optimize them. And when you look at that was my first job. Okay, I'm going to do a 10-inch base mid-range. I need it to be smooth all the way up to beyond 3K to allow me to cross over nicely at around 1.5. What materials can do that? All the newer, more rigid materials, most of the examples of those have been used at that size, 10-inch. I mean, it's for a subwoofer where you want very stiff over a very limited frequency range. A lot of them break up so violently in the upper mid-range where you'd be crossing over to the tweeter. They just don't work. And one of the first things I did was, okay, let's look at some examples of what other people have done with 10-inch drivers. And I'd look through driver catalogs, I'd go online, look at SEAS and all these other people. But there's not many examples in the hi-fi field of 10-inch base mid-range drivers. But there's lots of examples in the pro audio field. So I switched to looking at pro audio drivers. And in my mind is, if I can just find one example that works smoothly beyond 3K, then I know it can be done. So if it can be done, maybe I can hopefully do it myself. And so I bought a sample, checked it out, and yes, it matched what their specifications said. So now I had to develop my own cone. And out of all the materials, it was a paper cone that gave me that property. So that's what I continued to work with to develop. And I had to develop my own cone profile for the particular application I needed and to the right shape to act as a waveguide for the tweeter. So there were properties beyond it just being a base mid-range unit, the special properties you need when you're doing it as a concentric. So we had to tool that up and play with the pulp and try it out. But that's why I chose paper, and it works superbly well in this application.
Yeah, I think a big misconception that people have is that paper's cheap, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's cheap. It's not a 10-inch beryllium woofer that you're going to put on there." And they think that it could possibly sound bad, but it's paper's light, it's rigid, it does a good job as a cone if applied correctly.
It's rigid, and then in the area where it needs to be damped, and it depends on. Paper sounds so generic as an expression.
Mm-hmm.
A paper pulp, there's lots of different ways of mixing the fibers,
Mm-hmm.
additives. You can put short glass strands in it, you can put Kevlar fibers in, you can air dry it over a single-sided former, you can compress it between two formers. It's the way you process the paper and the way you create the pulp that gives you the ability to play. And so although it's an old tech, it's still sophisticated.
Mm-hmm.
I think people don't realize that getting the right mix in a paper cone driver is not straightforward, and
Mm-hmm.
you can vary the properties quite considerably by what you use as the pulp and how you process it.
Yeah. Were you going to say something, John?
Yeah, there seems to be a thread of real world kind of install questions here, and I'd like to read this one because it has one of my favorite speaker terms. Mark is asking, the Sourcepoint 8 has 2 rear ports but doesn't come with bungs to plug one or both ports to tune the bass to the room. Do the speakers always sound best with both ports open? And just along those lines, Andrew, both the 10 and the 8 have rear ports. And there seems to be a few questions about, hey, what size room and how close to the wall can I do this? So if you could ask
Yeah,
a
and in
debug
fact,
question and what kind of room they're intended for.
yeah, I was, funnily enough, this morning, finally watching Erin Hardenson's latest video about having measured the KEF, measured the ELAC and the Wharfdales and plotting responses and talking about how close you could put them to the wall. And, the KEF having this greatly shelved down response before it ultimately rolls off. But the point being, it loses 6 dB of mid bass, right, compared to what I've chosen to do. And this is a choice. And yeah, we came up with a special sort of bass alignment for a bass driver when we were at KEF, which sort of did that. It shelved down before it rolled off. And the idea was the closer you get to the wall, the more bass reinforcement you get, especially with vents at the back. And therefore, should you roll off the bass so that you make deliberate use of the rear wall or front wall? That's another argument we can get into. What do you call the rear wall? Is the rear wall behind you? Or is it the rear wall, the wall that's behind the speaker? We could argue that for a long time. So the closer you get to the wall, you get bass build-up. And so if you deliberately shelve down the bass, you're onto a winner. And that has implications right from the outset. Choices have implications. There's talk about a lot of my speakers are relatively insensitive. 85 dB typically for the bookshelves. And, there's no way around the physics of designing speakers, especially for the low frequency performance. You've got this lock of 3 parameters: bass extension, box size, and efficiency. And you don't have the freedom to have everything that you want. You can pick 2 of them independently. The third one will be given to you by the physics. So if you want efficiency out of a small box, you don't get bass. No matter what people say, you don't get deep bass out of them. And so you can go extreme with one of the parameters and then have to work with the other 2, or you can massage it around. So when I was doing the ELAC speakers, because they were supposed to be affordable speakers, entry-level speakers, you want a decent bass extension because you don't want, as a newcomer to audio, have to play around with a subwoofer in a 2-channel system. It's not easy to do, and it's extra cost. You're buying cheap speakers, now you've got to add a few $100 at least for a subwoofer. That seems wrong. So I made sure they had bass extension, and the box size is whatever was an acceptable domestic size for an entry-level 5-inch speaker or 6-inch speaker. So that then tells you can't have high efficiency unless you cheat on impedance or high sensitivity. A lot of people cheat on impedance. They don't tell you. They say compatible, 8-ohm compatible. That has no definition, accepted definition of what that means. And some of them will go down to 3 ohms. That is not an 8-ohm speaker. So if you want to stay true to a specification, then there's a limit to how low you can let the impedance drop. How you measure sensitivity apparently is up for grabs. The idea of putting calibrated microphone 1 meter away from the speaker, or the equivalent of putting in 2.83 volts and saying, oh, it produces 85 dB. Some people get adventurous and say, well, it's a pair of speakers in a room. No, that's not the agreed definition of speaker sensitivity. If you use those numbers, you can claim a marketing advantage, but you're not actually getting a performance advantage. So I stayed true to that. But if we go back to that comparison to the KEF, or any speaker that is deliberately shelved down before it rolls off to account for the wall, because you don't have, in that region, which defines the overall system sensitivity, you can say, let the wall do some of that low bass so that I can get some more mid-band efficiency, and it'll still come back to flat because I've used the wall. And so in that manner, you can get a higher sensitivity than you would have got otherwise, especially when you're using a small driver like a 5-inch driver. So it's all down to the physics of what you can actually do, and the choices you make within that. And so with the 10-inch driver, I was finally, and it's a big box. Yay, big box means I can get both higher sensitivity and good bass extension and good output capability in the bass. So now I can get a very easy impedance to drive and 91 dB. I could have maybe said 93 dB and 4 ohms dipping to 3 at a minimum, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted, there's a compatibility issue with amplifiers if you let the impedance drop too low. So I thought, we'll get a mix still of a good high sensitivity, but an easy impedance and a decent bass response, and then it becomes compatible with a wide range of different amplifiers, and particularly tube amplifiers. Bearing in mind that going back to the 70s and stuff, and lots of people might be wanting tube amps with a high sensitivity speaker, then it met that target goal. So
What is
so I'll ramble. So I'm now getting back to, so it's rear-vented, and yeah, sure, if you get it too close to the wall, there'll be a lot of bass. Now, I deliberately put 2 vents on, so that you could have a choice of tuning. We didn't supply a vent with it, but a sock or a tennis ball. Grab the foam ball from your dog, stick that in one of them. When you got 2 vents tuned to a certain frequency, in this case, somewhere around 45 hertz, if you plug one of them, it'll tune half an octave lower. But you can't have it tuned lower and have bass sensitivity out of it. So in that low bass, let's say below 60 something hertz, by blocking up one of the vents, it'll now tune to about 35, 36 hertz, but at maybe 3 to 4 dB lower level. But the wall will make up for that. So if you do want to have a difficult room where you're having bass problems, block off one of the vents, and it'll work perfectly well doing that. So yes, that's why I thought of, one of the reasons I thought of doing 2 vents. The other is by having them symmetrical in the box, it kind of fights against some of the internal standing waves that sometimes come out the vent.
So you wouldn't want to block off both vents.
That's probably taking it too far. That would be an very overdamped bass. So, I guess in a very small room and up against the wall, you can try that. It will work. It'll just start rolling off the bass a lot earlier when you do that.
Yeah, maybe like a situation where you want to integrate a subwoofer, a little bit more accurately or something along those lines.
Oh, absolutely. If you're going to use a subwoofer, block them up. Well, it depends. So this is the problem between talking stereo and home theater. Because home theater is designed to have subwoofers. It's integrated in the whole system concept, and there's the output from the processor to be able to drive subwoofers. There's the high pass filtering in the processor to cut the low bass from going to the main speaker. And so you're good to go integrating a subwoofer. It's still not easy. My job as a speaker designer is to integrate all the drivers together to get this seamless performance. And yet with subwoofers, we go, you have a go. You see how difficult it is. But in a stereo system, most stereo systems don't have a subwoofer output. They certainly don't have high pass. They might have a second set of preamp outputs, but they rarely have a high pass filter. So how to integrate a subwoofer with a speaker in a regular stereo system means that if you were getting into, there's 2 aspects about what a subwoofer gives you. It gives you bass extension, and it gives you bass output capability that your satellites don't have. Well, if you just take a subwoofer in a regular stereo system and you don't high pass your main speakers, they will overload just as much as they always did before you added the subwoofer. So all you've gained with the subwoofer is bass extension on music that you're not playing too loud. But as soon as you play it loud, speakers bottom out. And you got less adjustability of how to perfectly match that subwoofer to the main speaker, because you can't even control and you don't know where the cutoff point really is for the speaker. Back to specifications again. You should see how people kind of cheat on bass extension quotes for their speakers. So Rel do a good job with that kind of thing. You know, they've set themselves up to understanding what is the best way to teach people how to integrate a subwoofer in a regular stereo system. But most subwoofers that are designed for home theater, it's not that they won't work, it's just more difficult because they're not teaching people how to do it in a stereo system.
No, exactly. Well, speaking while we're on bass and driver size, there was a question here from Bantam or Bantam, maybe. I'm bad with names. Are there driver side limitations with concentric drivers? So I know one of the first things I always hear whenever the first time somebody sees a Sourcepoint 10, they're like, wow, I didn't expect it to be this big, because it's kind of hard to gauge how big that speaker is. You know, John, maybe you guys can work on like setting something up for scale next to it, like a banana or a deck of cards or something. But but everybody always says that. But is it possible to go bigger? You know, are there advantages to going larger between your Sourcepoint 10 and 8? Just kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
It has been very amusing standing at the front of the room, as I always do, watching people walk in and go, oh, that's bigger than I thought it was. And in my mind, I want to go, how big do you think a 10-inch bass driver is? You know, as soon as you know the specification is a 10-inch bass driver, you should expect a big box. And if you look at the speaker, the box isn't that much wider than the driver. You know, I tried to fit as big a diameter driver into that box width as I could. But yes, it's a big box. And yes, there are bigger concentric drivers. You know, back to the mention of tannoy. They go all the way up to 15-inch. And that's difficult to do with the way I've chosen to do concentric drivers. You know, if you look at again, a lot of paper cones in those tannoys, but if you look on the back of them, there's all these strengthening ribs that are glued on by hand to kind of strengthen that cone to work up high enough. But also by using compression drivers have typically in the past worked down to lower frequencies than you would think to cross over a regular 1-inch or 1/4-inch dome tweeter. You know, compression drivers have maybe a 2-inch voice coil or a 3-inch voice coil, depending on what frequency range they're operating over, so they can handle the power going down low, but a tweeter can't. So the bigger you go in bass driver in a two-way system, those cone breakup modes are going to come down in frequency, demanding you cross over lower, which demands you have a tweeter that can run comfortably and low distortion down to a much lower frequency. And so 10-inch was so far, let's say, I'm not going to say I will never again, not after now doing a two-way concentric, but that was the limit. I felt I was comfortable with, having not ever developed a concentric driver even that big. I wasn't going to push myself to do it bigger. What would it take for me to be able to go further? That would be something to think about and do research, but it's nothing I've committed to. That has to be one of those things that I work in between projects, kind of. You have to be doing ongoing research, which is long term, and ideally that research means I've thought of something, I prototyped it, it looks like it work, put it on the shelf. So next time we have a development project, you look at what's on the shelf and you go, oh, that prototype, that actually worked. Now let's productionize it. It's very bad news to go, I think this might work, when did he want it? 6 months' time. Yeah, okay. Let's cross our fingers. Not the way to do it.
What is like sort of the time to go from concept, prototype, testing all the way to something coming to market? Can you kind of walk us through from your experience that timeline?
Well, Andrew, maybe you want to say what a typical product development cycle
Yeah,
looks
yeah,
like
that's probably
at other
better
companies
context.
versus the MoFi Electronics product cycle. It's a little different.
Well, that's how long is a piece of string, right? Because ELAC, we got the keys to the office on February the 17th, I think it was. And the June Stereophile show in LA, I think, was where we released it. Not Stereophile show, the Los Angeles show. We showed a prototype, June or July. And we were manufacturing in September and shipping by November. And that's having keys to an empty space. So setting up everything and designing the product all at the same time. Now we had a factory that was very amenable to catering to our every whim and making sure it happened. But that was a very aggressive schedule. TAD, from the first concepts of thinking about concentric beryllium driver and is it possible, to showing the, let's say, pre-production speaker, that was 3 years. But that's developing beryllium concentric drivers that had never ever been done before. Still haven't. It's the only one. So with MoFi, again, I didn't even have keys to the office to begin with. That came a couple of months after that. So I was working from home and thinking, working on concepts. And then I'm setting up the office and the listening room and the lab, as well as finding vendors, who's going to be capable of and willing to work with me to go through this stage of prototyping and checking things work. So that was a rather long process. So I started around late January 21, I think. Yes.
Sounds about right. There was a period of time there where no one knew where Andrew was after you had
off the grid.
I'd left
your
ELAC,
previous
but hadn't
gig.
told anyone. I joined MoFi and hadn't told anyone. And then suddenly I pop up. We decided to make the announcements. So starting from zero without even knowing what the concept was that we would do, that was January 21. We were in the market. Did we show it what was the first showing? Was it Axpona?
Axpona. Yeah.
So that was
2022.
Oh no, I'm sorry. No, it was Capital Audio Fest, November of 22. November 2022. Yeah.
Yes. So, and that showing was when it was close to production. I mean, it was all, there weren't any changes much after that. So, 2 years for that. But then Sourcepoint 8 came along much quicker because it was a development of something that already worked on. And of course, whenever you're developing variants of something or of some technology that you've already established working, then the follow-ups can come quicker. But every time you're trying to think of something new to do, then you need time to work on it. And, that's why I've enjoyed MoFi. We've spent the time to kind of do it properly, to give me time to think it through and make sure it's going to work and not rush it too much. So I've been having a fantastic time because it's given me time to think. And I've got all these other ideas in my head that buzzing around that I want to try out as well.
Typically,
can you tell a little more about that? Like, let's tease it a little bit. Sorry, Jim.
Yeah, well, just in a moment, I want to address one question. I mean, a lot of these brands will have to come out with different variants when they introduce a line of speakers. They have to have 2 or 3 center channels, 2 or 3 tower loudspeakers. I mean, it's a very traditional playbook. And
Yeah.
I think with Andrew, we just wanted to do something that was very different from the rest of the market. So the Sourcepoint 10 was kind of just saying, hey, here's that statement product that we're going to base all of our technology and future development on, and obviously sticking with concentric design, but doing a two-way concentric was very different than what we've seen from Andrew in the past.
Yeah.
But one question people have had is, can you lay them horizontally? So we didn't have to develop a dedicated center channel. There are people that use source points in home theater systems, and because it's a concentric driver, you can flip it horizontally and use either a Sourcepoint 8 or 10 also as a center channel loudspeaker. So you can very easily
it works
match across the
superbly.
front.
You know, concentric drivers, by their very nature, are identical radiation pattern in every direction. So very uniform, orientation doesn't matter. When you do it as a three-way, there's some compromise to a small degree between doing it vertically and horizontally, because you've got a separate base driver. So above the crossover point between the woofer and the concentric, then it's uniform pattern in all directions. But in that crossover region, it is not, and it still works better vertically than horizontally. But with this, with it being a two-way, there is almost no measurable difference in any direction. So it's a two-way concentric is absolutely the best choice in that respect for a center channel. And because center channels, it's one of these things that as speaker engineers, we're required to do things that in our heart we know this is not the way to do it. And center channels are almost exactly that, because we've always chosen vertical arrays of drivers because the widest range of listening positions is in the horizontal plane. So you need the best off-axis performance horizontally, and you can tolerate to some degree worse performance in the vertical direction. It'd be good to have no compromise there, but if you're going to have to compromise with regular space drivers, you put the compromise in the vertical direction. And what do we do with a center channel? We say we can't have it stood up because it blocks the screen. So we need something that's wide and not very tall. So can you put two base drivers and a tweeter in the middle, which compounds the problem? And you go, really? You do it because that is the only solution that works. You can't even get one big enough base driver and a tweeter because it becomes too tall. So you use two smaller base drivers, or maybe four and a tweeter. And all those multiple drivers are compromising your horizontal performance. So in fact, as I was developing the Sourcepoint 10, a lot of my early listening, I had it on its side for the simple reason that I didn't have a short enough stand. And so sometimes, well, what process did you use to develop this speaker and listen to it? Well, I had to put it on its side because I didn't have the right height speaker stand. That sounds a horrible reason for designing something, but I didn't have any short speaker stands. So by putting it on its side, it lowered the center point of the speaker about 4 or 5 inches. And also because the speaker, a lot of people don't realize the speaker does actually angle slightly backwards. It's straight for about 3 inches, then it angles in. And when you sit it on that angle, which is about 3 degrees, and you sit it on the right height stand, then it's back, the tweeter's back on the right axis for your ears. And so I listened to it like that, and I used to show it off to people like that. And I love that look, even for a stereo system. It takes me back to a speaker from my youth that I always liked, which is the Gale company called, Gale that made the turntable, but they made the speaker, the 401C with these chrome end caps. Beautiful artistic design. And that was a cabinet that was wider than it was taller on a nice chrome stand. So I was loving it that way. And it made it obvious that, we don't have to make a center channel. It is a central channel if you just put it on its side. We even have an extremely well-kept secret of this little painted block of wood that's angled appropriately, that if you put it on top of your speaker stands and then turn the speaker on its side, is now correctly oriented to listen to, or it becomes a puck underneath the speaker if you put it on your credenza for using it as a center channel.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Or set all three of them up vertical behind an acoustically transparent screen. We can get past all of it. But we do have another interesting question. I know we only got time for a few more. But this one, so not really speaker related as much, but I always like these kind of questions. So what's your favorite tracks you use for using playback when designing speakers? Do you have like a demo track that you kind of go to say, hey, the speaker's got it, or if this one doesn't have it?
I have a variety, and it does change through the years. Not so much because I get tired of it, because pretty much every piece of material I use for demo, musically, emotionally, I really like the tracks. It's very rare. Yeah, sometimes you hear a track that is a hi-fi demo track, and I go, yeah, but it's obvious you picked that just for its hi-fi demo qualities. It doesn't engage me. And yeah, because I like to be the guy out there running the demo all day long, I'm hearing this music over and over again. And certainly in the days of TAD, when we had it at the Venetian suites, we had this big suite, and I would stay in that bedroom as where I was sleeping overnight. I would come back from dinner, and I've got this $500,000 stereo system basically in my living room. And I would often just come back and play those same tracks, because I certainly didn't have that good of a system at home. Even though I had the speakers, I didn't have electronics that could match what we were doing with the TADs. So I would listen to those tracks as my way of enjoying having those speakers to myself in a superb system. So, it's always, obviously, there's a mixture of, yes, you'll need some male vocals, some female vocals, some jazz, some high energy. And it's been fun recently, especially with MoFi, with the guys who are at MoFi, listening to some of the music they play, stuff that I've either never heard of, which is easy because there's lots of music I've never heard of. My music taste probably match my food taste, and John will know a lot about that. But I get exposed to lots of different kind of music, and you start to learn that even if it's a general genre that you wouldn't typically listen to, you can pick some tracks out of some of those albums that you go, oh, I actually like that. And so I'll incorporate that in, because I've got to be sensitive that I can't just play my music in that sense at a show. I've got to have a reasonable variety if people come in and ask for it. Before I joined MoFi, I had no idea who Tool were. And they're still relatively old in the scheme of things.
Andrew, I think the very first time I heard you do a demo, I was thinking, like you were saying, something that we would all expect to hear at a hi-fi show, and I think it was Sia by
Dead Mouse.
Dead Mouse. Thank you, John. It escaped me for a minute. And I saw walking, I'm like, this is not what I was expecting, but it was a fantastic demo, which is awesome. So I appreciate you always kind of like expanding the bounds of what we're typically used to hearing at these type of shows.
And what you got, John?
9 Inch Nails, for God's sake. And
9 Inch Nails and Tool. Andrew, you're getting your horizons broadened here. You're going to be a math rock fan in no time. John, do you have
what are your rapid fire, quick top go-to demo tracks when you're doing hi-fi?
Well, I was just going to say, that the song I identify Andrew with the most for as long as I've known him is La Habanera by Yellow. It's like every time I hear Yellow, I think of Andrew Jones. You have some people asking for specific tracks. Sia by Dead Mouse certainly is an Andrew favorite. What I remember, the first cut you played when we came to your studio, I think was North Dakota by Lyle Lovett from Joshua Judge's Ruth. That's a killer album, very well mastered, really kind of let us hear how natural the mid-range was on the Sourcepoint speakers. The other band we introduced you to was Infected Mushroom. You remember
Yes.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So our goal when we came to Beverly Hills to hear the pre-production samples was to see if we could break them. And so Tool and Infected Mushrooms were the weapons of choice for that, but we couldn't.
Very
We couldn't
nice.
break them.
I know one of the sales women from a local dealer, Kat, she came in and she wanted to hear that Tool track. And she was rocking away and said, turn it up. And I was just blasting it out so loud. And we didn't manage to break the speakers. Interestingly, we didn't really break our ears either. One of the cool things about when you get a system right, you can play it loud without it going, that's hurting my ears. I mean, technically it is hurting your ears. You shouldn't do it for too long. At least you get temporary threshold shift. There was as an aside, there was a story from a professional audio magazine years back in England. This studio that had grown up on an industrial estate that had been changed into a housing estate. So they used to play, obviously, the music loud in the control room as they're mixing and go into the wee small hours. Fine when it was an industrial estate, but now they started getting complaints from neighbours to the city council of this loud music that they could hear through the middle of the night. So they sent a representative from the council to find out what was going on. And the engineer, very clever, he said, why don't you come in and get a tour of the studio, listen to what we do, then you can go outside and listen to see how loud you think it is. So they just blasted the music so loud, he got temporary threshold shift. When he went outside, he couldn't hear the music. He didn't know what the neighbors were complaining about.
I've never heard that term before.
No.
Temporary threshold shift.
No, but I feel like it's my new mantra for life.
Well, let's see here. So we have, believe it or not, we've flown by a whole hour. I think, Nick, how many questions did we get through? Just a couple?
We got through a few, but there's some really good ones in there. And Andrew, I wish that everybody could explain questions as deep as you could in these. They were really, that was a lot of great information.
Yeah, a lot of folks, appreciated the dropping the knowledge and really kind of unpacking the whole process. So thank you for doing that. It was very interesting.
I do see a question we're asking the difference between Sourcepoint 8 and Sourcepoint 10. And that is actually a very interesting question, because whenever it gets back to something we're not quite doing, which was certainly what I was doing at ELAC, developing a range of speakers. Whenever you develop a range of speakers, you have to make sure that all the ones in the range follow a sonic signature, and that's not easy to do. So you have to work your best to achieve that. And it's not always easy. Can you make a 4-inch driver that sounds the same as the 5, as the 6, as the 8 in different size cabinets? So with Sourcepoint 8, I was going to face this challenge. It's going to be a mini-me version for all the people who said, I didn't think the speaker was that big. This meets the need, but it has to remain true to what Sourcepoint 10 was. So what I found when I first started modeling it was that most of the parameters that the driver needed to have, the motor strength and the coil and the cone profile, could all stay the same. The larger area combined, or the smaller area combined with smaller mass, meant the motor strength needs to be the same. So all I've got to do is technically, what if I just trim the cone down from 10 inches to the size needed for an 8-inch driver? Just cut the edge off and produce a new surround. That would guarantee to have a very similar sonic signature. And since it was a 8:10 ratio, well, use that for the cabinet. I said for the mechanical 3D, just take any dimension you can find, multiply it by 0.8, put the thing together, see what we get. And so it truly is a mini-me. And so obviously I have to redo the crossover because there's some parts of the performance, like sensitivity, that won't be as high because it's a smaller box. But that was the basic approach. So it guarantees that they're as similar as I can make them.
Yeah, very cool. All right, Nick, the time is upon us. Thank you guys. First of all, obviously, thank you, John and Andrew. Like I said, time is absolutely flown by. We'll have to come back and do a whole nother one here when you guys have some additional products in this whole lineup to unpack this a little bit further. But Nick, best question, and then we'll get a little drum roll for our winner for the big giveaway today.
Yeah, so for this one's for the best question for the One Step Joni Mitchell album. Awesome album and awesome pressing, by the way. But I think our question of the day was from Mark Block regarding the placement of the speakers and the port bungs. I think that one's I think that's our winner for today. So Mark, shoot us a message and we will we'll mail you over your
know
album.
how to block the ports. Was that it?
yeah. But like I said, you're gonna love that album. So enjoy it.
Awesome. And Nick asked me, could he be the winner? And I was like, no.
I know. Every time I want to be the winner.
But our big giveaway of the Sourcepoint 8s, we'll get a little drum roll, please, is from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Where it says my old hometown is. I'm going to totally not pronounce this name right, so I apologize. But is it Bosker Posey? Beosker. You are the winner of a brand new pair of Sourcepoint 8s. So congratulations. We will connect with you and get those out to you very, very shortly. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and really, dropping a lot of knowledge. I think you could see from a lot of the comments, people really enjoyed just learning more about yourself, your background, the whole process. And John, thank you for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to have you, and I'm sure we'll see you again real soon. So thank you, gentlemen, for your time.
Thanks,
and
guys.
for being part of our live stream today.
All right, cheers. Thanks for
All right,
joining.
thanks everyone. We will see you again here real soon. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.